Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. It's my great pleasure to welcome today's program Gary Baracco, who's Director of Global Product Marketing at Amber Road. And today we're going to talk about digitization. Where can you find value? Now, there's a lot of discussion and talk these days about digitizing the supply chain or the digital supply chain, and what it means, and why is it important. But ultimately, you end up with the same question, which is, where's the value, right? Where can companies find value in digitization? What's the business case for it? And that's really going to be the focus of today's conversation. And it's great to have Gary on the program to share his insights and advice on this topic. Gary, welcome to the program.
Great to be here and to meet your listeners.
So Gary, you're a first-time guest here on Talking Logistics. I know we've had some of your colleagues on before, but just like I always like to do whenever I bring someone new onto the program, I'm always interested, how and why they got involved with supply chain logistics to begin with. So why don't you briefly tell us a little bit about your career path, how and why you got involved with supply chain, and what your current role and responsibilities are there at Amber Road?
For sure, Adrian. And I don't know, there probably was no predestiny for me to move into global trade and supply chain, but I love it because every day there's something new. And in today's environment, there's something new almost every minute. Well, in 2000, I actually left military service after 20 years in the United States Army. I started working for a company supporting IBM's Rational, which is a software testing tool, as their marketing director, and my first civilian experience outside of marketing for the United States Army. 5 years later, I began working for a company called EC Vision, and it's a supply chain collaboration software company. And I led the sales and marketing initiative when we grew that company. At EC Vision, our platform supported all aspects of sourcing and product development that occurs before the shipment of goods. And 3 years ago, Amber Road wholly acquired EC Vision, and the solutions now comprise the deepest and broadest global trade management solution, Amber Road.
It's interesting. A lot of folks that are in the supply chain logistics field, have a background in the military. And obviously, I think you can make the strong argument that the military has one of the strongest and most impressive disciplines in supply chain management when you think about everything that goes on there. So I know, these days a lot of companies look for people with that kind of background because they, it's probably, everything that's going on in retail, everything that's going on in manufacturing, everything else, in some ways they compare, their can't hold a candle to the type of logistics challenges that the military has to, is faced with.
And there's two sayings that come out of that. An army rides on its stomach, right? And so, if we don't have fed soldiers, then they're not going to fight, right? And it's always about moving bullets and beans, right? So I guess the old time, the army rode on beans and they fired their bullets. So bullets and beans.
Absolutely. Well, great career path there, and certainly now you're in the front lines of everything that's happening here in the supply chain world and with
Yep.
digitization. So let's kind of dive into this now. And again, like I said, when we talk about digitizing the supply chain, the conversation often leads to where's the value, and it also often leads to achieving end-to-end supply chain visibility. I mean, that's kind of one of the core areas that a lot of companies focus on, which really has been an elusive goal for companies for a long time. Is digitization a prerequisite to truly achieving end-to-end supply chain visibility? And kind of what's different today compared to, let's say, 5 or 10 years ago?
Supply chain visibility is a term that's been thrown around for years, and I think it's changing as the times are, as technology evolves. But a decade ago, supply chain visibility was truly only available, let's say, at the container or the shipment level, and that was acceptable. But today, visibility encompasses a more complete view of an international supply chain. And I have to think that almost every supply chain is international, because even if you're manufacturing within a regional setting, your raw materials might be coming from an international supplier. So every piece of the supply chain truly is international. There might be a few that aren't. But when we talk about visibility, we're looking for full control tower visibility. And this gives insight into each step of the product lifecycle, right? And visibility, you say, is digitization a prerequisite? Well, when we're gaining visibility through a digitized supply chain, what we're doing is bringing together the design and sourcing side, right? That side that I came from, and the manufacturing production side, compliance, trade compliance, and shipping functions all into this one central location, one platform. This then enhances communication both internally, externally, and takes the guesswork out of global trade management. And it provides what we've always called, and so many other companies call, one version of the truth, right? Or the whole truth now. And that's including all the departments, all your stakeholders, and all of your external partners. So everyone can benefit from that communication. So, with that said, technology solutions have come a long way in the past decade, let's say. And companies that seek to really stay on the forefront are embracing software and its changes. And it gives them the edge over the competition. So, companies that are not digitizing or not looking future to say, well, what comes next, are really going to be archaic dinosaurs. In today's global supply chains, you need complete end to end visibility. And it's really often thought of as the holy grail. Now, I even get in discussions with my own team and saying, well, what's end to end? It needs to include payment processing or not, right? But it's from the conception and design, the commercialization of a product, bringing that into a factory, then packaging and preparing the shipment, shipping the goods, importing and exporting, crossing borders, and possibly looking at the opportunity to use duty savings programs. This is an end to end supply chain. So that might be the holy grail. And that's the question, Adrian. Do we need to first understand that there are many definitions of supply chain visibility? Let's just accept that, right? There's levels of visibility. How broad, how deep do you go? Tracking a container from origin to destination is supply chain visibility. Sure, that's one definition. It's a limited definition. So, what value does that provide, right? Do I know what's in that container? And in today's consumer friendly environment where the consumer has to know everything about their order, and the consumer could also be a larger customer, a retailer, for example. But do I know what's in that container? Um, who owns those contents, right? Who are they? Who's the end destination? What import regulations apply to that container? Maybe even different import regulations for each of the cartons within that. And what purchase order kind of correlates to each of those boxes within that container? So, if we're talking about container level visibility, we need to actually go inside that container and dig deeper. So, when I talk about true supply chain visibility, it's much more than that. Again, it begins at the product concept, it extends to the receipt of the payment. It requires more comprehensive digital technology that looks at company-wide transparency. So, to put it simply, it's the disruption of information silos that exist today. They're historically inherent in our supply chains, and it's not solely tracking that container. It's the correlation of more digitized data of what's in that container and presenting that information in that consolidated platform to all of the different parties. And that enables true visibility. And honestly, it doesn't end there, but I'll finish that sentence.
So when you talked about, you talked a lot about, the end-to-end visibility piece. I think that's something that's changing certainly in terms of really broadening the definition of what end-to-end, means. You talked about control tower. That's another topic that's, gets tossed a lot around a lot. But I think, when I look at that, it's really companies are looking for, that one platform where they can see the different aspects of that end-to-end process, however they look at it, which could include, everything from kind of the sourcing side to the manufacturing through to, shipping and customs compliance and so forth, but really having that that data, that information, at their fingertips, and correlate it so they can make, smarter decisions faster. And I think, when I think about digitization from the context of visibility, it's the fact that historically because companies now need to make those smarter decisions faster. They can't get away anymore with, waiting on faxes to come in, right? Or emails to come in, and then someone, to have to type that information in. It's really now, looking for ways to adopt newer technologies so that that information that they have, whether it's internally or from external training partners, how do you get that information into this platform as quickly as possible, in as complete and as accurate as possible, so that they can make those decisions, right?
It's all about data, right? And more and more we're starting to talk more about that compression of data. How do I need to digitize it first? I need to compress it, because we want more data, we want more reports, we want more visibility, we want to go deeper and broader, like I mentioned before. But data takes a lot of memory up, right? So how can I then jam a lot of data into a pipe that's only this big? So I need to either parse that data out and only present to you the data that you need to make business decisions, or I need to scrunch that data down, right? And so that's what we're doing with newer technologies. We're taking more and more data. That's a requirement in order to be as fast as we are in our supply chains now. So that digitization, you asked, is it a requirement to digitize? Yes, it's a requirement to digitize. We cannot push that much data through. If it's manual data, if it's hard copy data, if it's not soft and digital, we can't move it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You may want to just move your camera just slightly down a little bit more, just so we can get more of your, a little bit more than that. I don't know if you can do that. There you go. Perfect. So let's talk about one of those dimensions of visibility, which I think often gets overlooked, and that is the financial dimension of supply chain visibility, especially having a true understanding of costs, such as, cost to serve and total landed costs. I mean, how is technology helping companies in that area?
Well, almost every business decision comes down to that bottom line, right? What is the cost? What will it save? And often we haven't approached chief financial officers when we're out to sell software, and that's changed in the last few years. We realize that as a software provider, we need to talk to that chief financial officer because they're the ones that have the checkbook and they know what's in the savings account. How much are we making? What's our income and loss? And so every business decision relates to cost, and we have to admit that. And what's the true return on investment, right? So for global supply chains, the formula to really define cost is so complex, and we add more complexity to that equation every day as tariffs change, as duties shift, as we look at rising transportation costs, right? All of these unavoidable issues that we can't control feed into that equation. So there's a myriad of factors and considerations, and some of them are unpredictable. So we need to prepare for the unpredictable, right? And we need to make sure if something does happen that feeds into that cost equation, how can my supply chain react? And that's not just through agility and those techniques, but also having good content, right? When do I know that something happened? There's a change, right? How do I know of a price increase or a duty shift, tariff change? So good supply chain management, global trade supply chain management needs to be keyed into all of those factors all of the time. That's difficult. We can't do that on our own. We need technology solutions and automation to kind of fill that gap for us.
Right, right. And I think that's one of the, again, those data elements that has to come through, right? Is the
Right.
cost, whether it's transportation costs, as you said, inventory holding costs, duties and taxes. I mean, there's a lot of conversation today, right, with tariffs and what impact that's going to have. Obviously, that's going to change the cost equation, for many companies out there. So, really having, capturing what those cost elements are and being able to put it in the right context, as you said, because ultimately, if you're making decisions without truly understanding the financial impact of it, then you could be doing more harm than good at the end of the day in terms of what you're trying to accomplish.
we're going to kick off a survey next month, and we're going to survey our database and of supply chain global trade folks. And maybe I'll come back in a couple months when we get the results of that survey, because what we're asking is we're asking folks to give us information about what are those obstacles that are causing these issues with their supply chain. What are those challenges when I'm importing goods? What happens, right? But we're asking them what's costing them money, right? So what leads to an additional cost that you didn't predict in your supply chain? Was it a delay? Was it some sort of issue at the factory? Was there a shortage in my raw material, and so therefore I had to hold up production, and then I maybe had to air goods instead of ocean ship, right? And so we're going to be conducting a survey next month, probably open it for a few weeks. So maybe I'll come back and we'll have another point of discussion to talk more about cost, right? What are the cost factors that are causing us headaches?
No, that'd be great. Yeah, certainly
Yep.
look forward to seeing the results of that survey. I think that we could have a great conversation around, what insights come out of that. Kind of, changing gears a little bit, but another kind of dimension or where you can find value or define a business case around, digitization is around, risk management, right? So it's no surprise that supply chains continue to get, more complex, especially as it relates to, as they become more global and distributed, and obviously complexity implies greater risk. So in what ways does digitization help companies better manage supply chain risks?
Well, a few years ago, maybe like 9, 10 years ago, I don't know, time flies when you're having fun in supply chain. I talked about how we made this global shift to what we called offshoring. Remember when we used that term, right? And oh, we're going to move our production offshore, and that was the big trend. When really we've made these shifts from here in the U.S. producing locally, and then maybe moving to Mexico, and then we moved to Japan and China. Maybe when we were kids, everything was made in Japan or HO in Mexico, right? And we've now made that shift where everything has moved to a global supply chain. And that just makes your supply chain more complicated inherently. But over the past few years, we're seeing more complications that are occurring as we see walls going up left and right. We see Brexit occurring, and that's going to now possibly create a new border. We see globalization and protectionism. I use those terms interchangeably. One might be a positive view, one a negative, right? So we're globalizing or we're protecting. But all of this adds a layer of risk. Companies are trying to be more creative in their sourcing strategies. They want to qualify for trade preference, and so then that maybe broadens the footprint of their supply chain. They want to expand into new markets. I know that when AGOA, the African Growth Opportunity Act, came through, a lot of manufacturers said, hey, let's move to Africa and let's start production in Africa. It'll take us 5 or 6 years to get up, but there's great opportunities. But what's the risk then when we move our supply chains to Africa? Do they have the infrastructure for factories? Do they have the ports that I can actually dock big ships at? All of this are layers into our supply chain and how we need to be managing risk or mitigating risk. More and potentially new borders become crossed, both inbound, outbound, with our raw materials. Where am I going to get the raw materials to feed into my production facility? And then we've got this increase in government regulation, the populist, the protectionist measures, all becoming an additional factor. And as we shift from those traditional trade lanes, those sea and air routings and multi-country consolidation and deconsolidation, we need to bring in additional service and maybe new service providers. And all of these then become touch points for our supply chain. New relations have to be established. Service level agreements need to be put in place, and true strategic partners need to be formed. That becomes part of an already complex process, and this leads to the need for improved risk management strategies and tools. You can't do it without the tools. So, a critical factor in your supply chain is risk mitigation, and that's the ability to identify potential impacts from unplanned events, and then automate a response to that issue. What happens if? What if a wall goes up tomorrow? So the best way to do that is, looking at maybe speed to market being important to your business, right? So I need to ensure my goods start production on time. I need to then make sure that they exit the factory as scheduled and the shipments picked up. And this means then the cargo should be on the scheduled ocean carrier that I planned, right, for that sailing date. But one issue, one hiccup could lead to a delay. And that interruption then might cause a lack of information at the time of export, which could have been alleviated if you have automation tools. These tools like Amber Road's global trade management system, they mitigate risk by facilitating better communication. They provide that visibility that we talked earlier on, and an efficient means to kind of ensure that things are going. When I talk about that control tower visibility, I often envision the old style NASA, right? And when you always saw the rocket launches, you saw this massive room filled with people and these computer systems and their screens going, and we're kind of tracking things moving. And this is, I'd love to see, a big company supply chain kind of looking like that, and seeing what's happening, almost like the airport control tower, right? I can watch these dots moving, and this one's turning red. That means that there's risk. So a digital platform, by digitizing the information, feeds all of this data, and it needs to let me know when something's going wrong, because I can't track everything that's going right. There's just too much to track. So I need to be alerted to what's going on, and then track and trace while my goods are in transit and moving through all of the supply chain.
That's a great point. I mean, I think exception management is certainly a key objective here, because especially the more global you are, the more complex the supply chain is. You can't possibly be able to track everything. Particularly, that makes no sense to track everything that's already going according to plan or it's going on schedule. So you really have to focus in on those areas that's going to have a potential, that can potentially disrupt your plans, and can have a financial impact or a customer service impact. So I think one of the things you said here was, part of the objective is really trying to be as proactive as possible to mitigate, some of these
Yeah.
risks, or even prevent them, from happening to begin with. Because if you've got more forward visibility and you've got more complete and accurate data that's coming in, now you're able to take corrective actions sooner rather than later, and potentially avoid an issue that down the road. And I think I think it's interesting how these three things ultimately tie together. The visibility aspect, understanding the financial impact and the financial costs, and then obviously now here with risk management, because a lot of the ways that companies today manage risk is by adding inventory to their supply chain, right? So inventory is that buffer, right? And
Right.
a lot of if you put a dollar figure on that inventory, that is basically there as insurance, as a risk mitigation, it's a substantial number. And if you can replace inventory, this is something that's been talked about for a long time, but if you can replace inventory with insights and information, so that you can make smarter decisions faster and take corrective action, I mean, that's a huge financial benefits to companies out there, right?
But it means that we need to change, right? And we talk about the digital transformation, right? And transformation is such a scary word, but we can't continue. As I said early on, we can't continue to do business as usual in today's environment, or to prepare for the future. And that's just not easy for every organization to do. It requires investment and process change, and it upsets people. People that might have been in place doing, hey, I've done fine for years. Why do I need to do it a different way? But it leads back to that data. And I brought that point, that a data-driven world enables delivering an end-to-end, on-time, reduced risk experience. And if your siloed systems are still in place, then you can't share that data properly across the entire network. So as companies look to digitization, one of the biggest benefits is agility, right? We talked about these unplanned issues. So in order to assist with that hiccup, that unplanned obstacle that comes in the way, I need to be agile enough to dodge and ditch around it. And so that's a big part of the visibility, the management by exception level visibility, having that complete view, but then knowing what's my alternative, right? If I don't know what's on either side, I don't know which way to dodge. Okay, so you need to have agility layered in there along with that.
Yeah, you touched upon agility. That was going to be kind of related to my, next question, because I think that's another area that there's a lot of discussion around about the importance of agility. So how specifically can companies become more agile, and kind of what have been some of the barriers? Is it just that this kind of siloed perspective and siloed approach that companies have taken historically?
Yeah, well, there's so much other change that's going on in business, right? That I think that we're looking at, oh, I've got to make this product in a shorter product life cycle. I've got to be faster at speed to market. I need to make sure that the quality is the most, or I'm going to get bad stars on my website. I need to deliver quickly also. Um, and that might change, right? Consumer demand really drives the supply chain. I've said that for the last couple of years. But these are now becoming the norm, and companies are able to then react to this. But the concept of agility has to be kind of ingrained into the way they operate. It's emerged as a competitive vehicle for organizations that are operating in this uncertain and ever changing business environment. The best way to be more agile is to, once again, have digital information and digital data. Eliminating those islands of automation that are kind of present in supply chain today. It's what we've known. It's the way we've built supply chain operations and systems is, well, here's logistics, here's sourcing, production. Everybody kind of does their own thing and it all comes together. But we need to break down those silos, separate. I mean, you could still have your silos of system, but that data needs to come back together into one single platform that shares across the entire network. So if you want agility, it really demands the freedom of making changes and process improvements that come with that changes, from purchase order to proof of delivery, suppliers, logistics providers, everybody. And practically speaking, the type of platform that we offer has agility on multiple levels, right? How can what are the different scenarios that I'm going to run into, right? Anything from this trade agreement turbulence that we're seeing today, acquisitions, seeing lots of M&A moving back and forth. We've got concerns with our third-party network, right? Our logistics provider networks, right, that are happening. Capacity shortages on both ocean, truck, and rail. The consolidation of ocean carriers that we saw a couple of years ago. And then any new regulations that come in and all of these duty and tariff changes, they kind of all are monkey wrenches that we're throwing into a well-run supply chain. And then let's talk about hurricane season last year, right? And what we're looking at. I watched Weather Channel last night to see, well, what's hurricane season 2018 going to look like? Because these weather-related events really disrupt supply chains on top of political and all type of issues. So the bottom line is agility becomes a desirable trait in your supply chain. And every other feature, we talked to one customer and we said, hey, which feature is important? And she said agility is the most important, because with agility you can respond to anything else that happens. You can't lower the risk. We talked about lower risk. We talked about reducing costs. We talked about the response to ebb and flow of demand. None of that can happen unless I'm agile enough to dodge, right? So supply chains need a good yoga class, right? So that they can become more nimble and agile.
I love that. I may have to steal that, Gary. The supply chains need a new yoga class. I may have to write a blog post, or maybe you can write a blog post with that title, because I think
supply
that's
chain yoga.
supply chain yoga. I love it. But I think you brought up a great point. I think you mentioned earlier companies that continue to say, hey, what, why, why fix what's not broken? I've been doing this for years, right? And one of the things that I've been talking about for the past 2, 3 years now, I talk about that, past performance is no guarantee of future results, right? That
Yep.
statement you see in the financial reports, and then that the Marshall Goldsmith book, "What Got You Here Won't Get You There," is another one I point to, because I think
Yep.
that relates to companies as well, right? All the processes and technologies and people and talent that got you to this level of success is not necessarily what's going to get you to the next level of success moving forward, in light of everything that we've talked about today. So you really have to think about, how do you modernize, how do you transform, starting with your technology, right? And then obviously the people side of things, and the processes, and how you communicate and collaborate together to really address, these challenges, that every industry is facing, moving forward. Gary,
Right.
we're running short on time here, so I'm just going to go right to my last question here. I mean, as a way to wrap up, I mean, if I need to write a business case for, digitizing my supply chain to, present to my CFO or CEO, I mean, what are some of the key benefits or things that I should emphasize?
First of all, I'd be glad that the C-level executives are concerned about our supply chains, right? Because they need to be. That's what runs the operation and all of the elements. But as the level of competition among business just gets, increases, we've got this fever pitch going on. New companies emerging, old companies shuttering their doors. Digital technologies have become the difference maker, right? We might look at, in a few years, we might analyze why we have some of these Toys R Us and Sears and Roebuck, going away for the rest of eternity. Was it because they didn't move ahead and change the way they were doing their business, right? Could digitization have saved them? But digital global supply chains, don't just improve those internal operations, but they create that competitive edge that when they're designed, when they're deployed effectively, as companies start or continue to look to the future, they need to make the decisions that are going to move them into the future. It's not, well, this will get me through the next couple years. What's going to get you through the next 5 or 10 years? What's going to really solidify my technology foothold so that I can build on it? And that's got to be a platform that, again, you can grow with. Deploying a digital model of the supply chain provides the opportunity to drive value through the entire business. It's been proven. And in its realized state, when you have a digital supply chain, you create greater efficiencies, you minimize risk, and you improve agility. The number one feature of a digital supply chain, agility. It provides that complete visibility, and you've got to have visibility kind of up here. So we've got efficiency, risk, agility, but I need visibility over everything, and the ability to control what's happening, right? And that's where, when we talk about control tower, it's not just that I have a view, it's that I can actually put my hand on something and make it move. I can move the chess piece and get out of the way. And that then provides the aspect, all of the aspects that you need to improve your cross-border business, right? More importantly, the ability to manage those processes, because we have to realize there's people behind all of this technology. Process change affects people. So this doesn't become, let's say, a read-only solution. It provides collaboration with all of those parties and people. It makes their job easier by automating some of the tasks, right? They can't do it all. But at the same time, we want to look ahead. So we want to provide some level of analytics. What did I do? What was the result? Can I improve, or do I need to repeat that process because it worked well for me? So in turn, this enables all of that process improvement. The only way to manage the supply chain is to continuously improve and make better decisions for the future. Creating a digital supply chain that functions as a control tower. Every step along the way, you have visibility, but you can manage what's happening. And that's the next frontier for global companies that want to succeed. So to sum it up, I guess I would say that the measure of value that comes from a digital supply chain is that companies have visibility into all of the aspects, down to the conception, the production, the quality, manufacturing processes. They can measure the ability to collaborate on all of these different areas of the product life cycle, improve your order system and receive perfect orders from international suppliers that lead to on-time delivery. And we've seen reductions in costs, trade compliance costs, material management costs, all related to true collaboration. And that leads to year over year savings for an organization. We got into the discussion probably last year internally that said, does a digitized global supply chain actually generate revenue? And we couldn't say that it generated revenue, but it certainly did provide a company a competitive edge, which allowed them to win new markets and new business. But also, it's a huge cost savings. And we looked at all of those savings, which then increases the profit margin. That's what we need. So the benefits are there. They're substantial to organizations that deploy this type of technology, gives them that competitive edge. And those that don't really could end up, going the way of other iconic retailers and companies that we've seen that have not made it. So these are the things that matter to C-level executives. And so that would be my pitch to your CEO or CFO looking at a digital supply chain platform.
Yeah, and you're right. Your first comment there was, you'd be happy if a CEO, a CFO was actually paying attention to this or came up to you. And the reality is that they are beginning to pay attention
Yeah.
to this because it is, I think finally, after all these years, it is making it up to the C-suite in terms of really understanding, the impact that supply chain and even more specifically further down, logistics and global trade management, which have historically been viewed as, these back end things, something that just happens, right? And now they're
Just
realizing
happens.
it
Yeah.
just happens, right? And now they're realizing how they are having an impact and how they fit into the the bigger picture of everything we talked about here today. Well, Gary,
Sure.
we covered a lot of ground today. We talked about end-to-end visibility. We talked about financial visibility and understanding cost and all the other financial metrics around that. We talked about agility and the importance of that. We could probably spend the whole day talking more in depth about all these things and more, but I think we covered a lot of ground today and provided some great food for thought for our audience. So thank you very much for making the time to be with us today.
It's a great conversation. I look forward to more in the future.
Great. I want to thank those of you that joined us. If you're watching this episode on demand, either at the Amber Road website or on Talking Logistics, and you've got a question or a comment for Gary, you can post it there, and I'm sure he'll be more than happy to respond via that medium. Again, thank you for joining us and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.